when people do ice baths, then it's, maybe not 0 to C or maybe even lower. I don't know. What about athletes that have done literally ice baths? They sit in a trough with a bunch of ice and a bunch of water. I mean, they're
Yeah.
getting seriously cold.
Yeah, yeah. Look, I mean, I think that's probably going to influence. It's well, almost certainly going to reduce muscle soreness. So that's probably going to be the main benefit for them. Whether it's so cold that it becomes a noxious stimulus, painful stimulus, and therefore interferes with the nervous system and feelings of relaxation and recovery, I couldn't really say. But I think out there as sort of in the non-athletic population, more general public population, is this sort of warrior perception that, go colder is better. But in reality, I think there's probably some threshold there. And as I said, it's going to depend on the individual too, and what their experience is with their previous experiences with cold water immersion and their regular ambient environment. Like we've shown, differences between parts of Australia in terms of tolerance of cold water.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the adaptation is, if you're used to it versus not. Now I know why it's so dangerous for people that aren't used to it to be exposed suddenly to cold. Like when I first started, I was like, I couldn't control my breathing, and it was like, oh, it was really bad. But then I went through, I did it like 3 or 4 times a week throughout the whole winter, and it got colder and colder and colder. And then it was not a big deal to tolerate. I was able to go into, like I said, like really, really cold water that before I wouldn't have at all. And it wasn't so bad. So there's like a conditioning element from what I can see. But yeah, for most folks, now I understand, like if you're going to swim in the ocean, for instance, I would think for most people that are not prepared, it would be very dangerous for them to go in if the water is less than like 15 C or less, because they would like go into shock, and they probably couldn't recover, in a cardiovascular sense. And then just in immersion too, like you got to seems like you got to go slow with it. If you just literally jump into freezing water, I don't think you could tolerate it well.
No, I would agree with that. And particularly people who have existing cardiovascular conditions, like hypertension, cardiovascular disease, then that they need to be particularly careful and, probably seek some expert advice from a medical doctor before they embark on that sort of thing. But as you said, there's certainly some conditioning benefits, and starting out either at doing cold water immersion for just a short period of time or at a slightly higher temperature rather than, going straight in at 5 degrees Celsius or less, maybe starting out at 15 degrees, working, 5 minutes at 15 degrees and then working up, increasing the duration of your cold water immersion and reducing the water temperature a little bit at the same time. That's probably the safest way to go.
Did you guys find a sweet spot? Again, you mentioned this a bit, but is there a temperature below which it's just not necessary? There's really no benefit.
Yeah, we haven't done any systematic studies ourselves. All of our studies have been performed at that level of about 10 degrees Celsius, and I'd say probably 3/4 of the research around the world has been performed using that sort of water temperature as well. So I think that speaks for something in itself, in that there are some systematic reviews which have compared responses across many different studies, and I think they have sort of identified that 10 to 12 degrees Celsius seems to be about right for reducing body temperature and reducing muscle temperature, if that's your particular goal. I'm not aware of too many studies that have gone much below 8 degrees Celsius. And part of the issue there is just a practical issue in terms of the equipment that we use. They're cooling devices that cool down the water temperature in the bath that we use for our research typically don't go much lower than 8 degrees Celsius, whereas other people using ice baths just dump a whole lot of ice in there, and the temperature could be anywhere between 2 degrees Celsius and 8 or 9 degrees Celsius. So they've got much less control over the water temperature. So in research, we always like to control those sorts of variables so we get consistency between responses between individuals. So we've typically focused on that 10 degrees temperature. And as I said, systematic reviews seem to indicate that that's a sweet spot, at least for reducing body temperature and muscle temperature. As for its effect on other things like muscle soreness and feelings of relaxation and calmness, I'm not sure that there's enough sort of consistency in the research to be able to make any firm conclusions about the optimum temperature to provide other benefits like those beyond just reducing body temperature.